In this video, I'm going to be answering 20 or so questions that my lovely subscribers put to me over the last few days. I did a call out on my community tab, and thanks so much to all of you who responded. So if you've just stumbled upon this video and wondering who I am, my name's Des and I make videos on beauty, fashion and lifestyle for women of all ages, but particularly those of 50 plus. So without further ado, let's crack on with the questions. Now there's a dog barking. Now my subscribers and those of you who watched my channel before will wonder where on earth in the world I am. So as you can see from my background, I'm not in my usual domain, I'm actually in France and in a little town called Pézenas to be precise. And that little town is in the Languedoc-Roussillon area, and it's about half an hour from the sea, I think, from the coast, and about 2 hours possibly from the Spanish border. So we're really down in the southwest, not that far from the Pyrenees, but a little bit further over towards the Rhone. And the reason we're here is because we are considering either purchasing a property here or at least spending the winters here to escape the cold and gloomy London winters. So without further ado, let's crack on with the questions. And now there's a dog barking. This is apartment living in a little town in France. Right, let's crack on. So the first question is actually very pertinent, and it's from Fiona, and she's asked, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be? Well, that's quite a tricky one because, or is it a tricky one? I don't know, because I love the UK, I love living there, and I can't imagine living anywhere else for any length of time. But I would like to live in France some of the year. If I could choose, if money was no object, I would definitely have a house in France and a house outside of London, preferably in Eyebrow in Suffolk, which is one of my favourite places to visit. And I'm not sure that there's anywhere else in the world that I would actually want to live, because I enjoy city life. And actually other cities that I really love are Paris and New York. I would definitely visit them more, and I haven't been to Paris for, must be about 4 or 5 years now. So I would definitely visit Paris more. Whether I'd actually live there or not, I probably wouldn't, because if money was no object, and I know that isn't in the question, but if money was no object, I would definitely spend time in Paris, and I'd probably rent an apartment there. And I would definitely either rent or buy a place in the south of France. I don't know enough about the southwest of France to know whether I would prefer it to the southeast, because the southeast of France I know very well, or I used to know it very well, and I know it pretty well now because I spent many, many summers staying with my grandmother just outside Monte Carlo, Monaco. But I do love the southeast of France because you get the mountains by the sea, and that is one of my very favourite landscapes, I suppose, to have the sea and the mountains close by. It's absolutely stunning. And so if I could see that view every day, that would be fantastic. But I think I get bored with it because I love London life. I love city life. So short answer, the UK plus a bit of France thrown in for good measure. The next question is also related. What travel plans do you have for this year? Now, that's an interesting question because I've been debating that a little bit with my husband on the way here. So one of my cousins that I'm very close to lives in Berlin, and she and I shared the same great-grandmother, and our great-grandmother was born in Latvia, in Riga. And we have talked about going to Latvia together for so many years. And I think we should make 2025 the year we go. Now, I would like to do some other travelling around there, though. I don't just want to go to Riga. So maybe we need to think about how we can incorporate some other cities or areas, like Poland, for example, because I just watched a film called A Real Pain, which is set in Poland, and some of the towns looked so beautiful. And another part of my family, my father's side, my grandparents, so his parents, were born in a part of Poland that I think was kind of one of those bits of Poland that kept getting nicked by the Germans because they were German speaking, I think. I don't think they spoke Polish. And so I would like to possibly come down from Riga, maybe on the train, and go into Poland somewhere. This is all very unplanned at the moment. I haven't thought it through, but I need to speak to my cousin. I will speak to my cousin, and we will sort out a trip to Latvia. apart from that, because the summer was so awful in the UK last year, I think I'd actually like to go away somewhere in the summer where it's a bit warmer, but I don't really know where. Or we could do what we used to do, and in May we used to go, before lockdown, before the pandemic, we used to go to Limassol, or as they say in Greece, and this is a really bad Greek accent or Cypriot accent, please forgive me, Limassol. And we loved it there. It was really warm. The temperature was perfect. It was around the sort of mid to late 20s, so you could definitely go swimming. It was a lovely hotel, so we might consider doing that. Otherwise, we haven't really thought it through. Oh, the other thing is my husband, I forgot about that. My husband's planning a trip to Provence for a week to do some cycling, so I might go and join him at the end of his ride there, I don't know. So that at the moment is not terribly well formed, but kind of what I'm thinking about in terms of where I want to go this year. Now, a couple of beauty related questions, and the first one is, I'm sorry, that was Teresa who asked that question about my travel plans. Now, the next question is from D.W. Bueller. I don't know your first name. And her question is, would you ever consider having a tweakment? So either Botox or fillers or something of that kind. Well, I did try Botox about, where are we now? So about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more actually, probably about 15 years ago. And I went to this dermatologist who was all over social media at the time. She had a Harley Street practice. She was very well known and she'd been interviewed by people that I respected and all of that. And I was so disappointed. When I went for the first appointment and the sort of consultation, it was all lovely and, oh yes, we can do this and I can make a difference to this, that and the other. And actually she even talked about, I don't know whether it was I who suggested it or she did, but she talked about being able to do liposuction on me, or liposuction, which, yes, I'm glad I didn't have done. But then when I actually had the treatment, it made no difference at all. In fact, what it did, it sort of ended up giving me some kind of pillowy effect, a little bulge here, but it didn't do anything for these lines at all, which were a lot less pronounced than they are now. So I was really disappointed. Also, I hate needles. So I decided I wasn't going to try Botox again, and I'm still of that mind. I still don't really want to try it. I just don't like needles, and I don't really like anything being injected into my face. No, so I'm definitely, at the moment, although I know actually I do say never a lot, but at the moment I can't imagine any circumstance where I would want to have Botox or any other treatments or tweakments. But just to let you know, I have had a nose job. I've had a rhinoplasty when I was about 21. And my nose was quite long, longer than it is now. And it was also kind of it was sort of hung down a bit here. Now that brings me to another question, which is from Sarah Wilson. And she asks, am I still using the Ziip Halo daily? And she thinks it shows. And do I have any updates I can share? Now, I am really enjoying using the Ziip Halo, that's for sure. And I've used it this morning. Now, I can't say that I have spotted any improvements in my skin from the day I started using it, but I'm going to be doing an update at some point. I find before and after pictures really difficult to do because my space at home is really quite tricky. I don't have a lot of natural light. I've got a tiny weeny shower room where I have to balance the camera on it. And I do have some pictures of what my skin looked like before. It's just a question of, can I mirror those pictures after, if you know what I mean, in the same light and all of that. But I will try to do that. However, I'm not convinced that there will be any great differences. And I don't think there'll be any difference to my jawline, because ultimately the only thing that's going to improve my jawline is a facelift. And I really don't want to go down that route. I really don't. Again, I don't want to have any unnecessary operations or anything of that kind. So I'm just going to have to live with my jowls. And yes, it would be lovely if I could say the Ziip Halo will improve it, but I just don't think it will. Now, if you want two really excellent discussions about the Ziip Halo, I would recommend my lovely friend Cindy of Beyond 50 Skin. I'll link the video down below for you in the description box where she talks about her results from the Ziip Halo and her feelings about what it can and can't do for you. And I do use it usually 5 times a week. So if it is making my skin look brighter and maybe less puffy, then that's a great thing, but it won't do, I don't think, anything for my jowls. Now, the next couple of questions are also related. The first one is from Jessica Collins, and she says she would like to know what my other job is that I've mentioned on YouTube. What do I do? And she also wants to know how many children I have and whether I enjoy doing things in groups or alone. So my day job is working in local government. Now, I started there about 7 years ago, and it was after a long hiatus of being employed, because I tried to be self-employed and I made so many mistakes. Oh my goodness me. Before that, my job for many years was as a professional fundraiser. So I worked for a charity called Breakthrough Breast Cancer. Now, I did quite a stupid thing actually, because I was a relatively big fish in a small pond, because the charity had only started about 10 years before I joined it. So in charity terms, it was very young. I then went to be an even bigger fish in an even smaller pond. And so it carried on. And I made some very stupid mistakes. I should have actually gone to a much bigger charity and been a smaller fish and specialised, because I've realised that being a specialist is much better than being a generalist, and the reason I mention that is because now I'm a generalist in local government. I'm not a specialist. And so it's fine, but it does mean that the work isn't perhaps as stimulating as it might be if I were a specialist. Now, the second question was, how many children do I have? I have 2 children. I have a daughter and I have a son, and they are in their late 30s. And the final question from Jessica is, do you enjoy doing things alone or in groups? Well, that's a very interesting question. I think the answer to that is both. I am a social animal. I really enjoy being in a group and doing an activity. So, for example, over Christmas, we had a great group of friends come over, all from one family, as well as my kids. And we just had a wonderful time playing games. I am a great game player. And we played a couple of very funny games and we had such a laugh. I really enjoyed it. I also, by the way, really enjoy watching certain quizzes on television, but they have to be particular types of quizzes. There's so many. I only really like, and those of you in the UK will know, Only Connect. Anything else I like? I used to like University Challenge, but I'm a bit bored with that now. And I do watch Mastermind. I've been watching on and off for years, but they're okay. But actually Only Connect, because it's so difficult, is probably the one that I like, because when I first started watching it and a friend recommended I watch it, this was about 5 years ago, I thought, what on earth is going on? I have no idea. And it's kind of a lateral thinking / cryptic crossword game, but I do really enjoy it. So I'm going slightly off topic now. I do enjoy doing things on my own, and also very occasionally, not very often, but when I cook from a recipe, I'm really happy to do that on my own. I might have some music on, or I might have a podcast on, or something of that kind. So I'm very happy in my own company, and I'm an only child, so I'm used to being on my own. But I also do crave being part of a group and doing things together as well. That was a very long answer. I hope I wasn't too rambly, but it does kind of pertain to the next question, which is anything about your life that led you to your present YouTube work. And this is from Ruth. Or led in other directions first. That's the first part of Ruth's question. So, anything about my life that led to my present YouTube work? Well, I suppose there is, because I used to be a professional singer. So I was used to being on stage, and in a way being on YouTube is a bit like being on stage, because you're presenting something to an audience, you hope. And I suppose in some way that is related. I believe I'm right in saying that Little Poet on YouTube was a singer, much more successful than I ever was. I will insert a picture. I've tried to find a video of me singing at the Wembley Country Music Festival in 1982, but I've lost the video. I can't seem to get it back. Every time I go to it, it says it's not available to watch. So I'm trying to find it, but I'll pop a picture up of me with my first husband, actually, when we were singing at the Golden Palms in Blackburn, the dear departed Golden Palms, Blackburn. And I've also sung at Caesar's Palace, Luton. So those were the sort of heights of my career. So in a way, my YouTube work is related to that. And I guess it's, who knew there'd be this sort of trajectory? Because there was no YouTube back in the day. But I think it makes sense. And I think if my mum were here, if she were looking down on me, she would just say, go for it, girl. And actually that leads very nicely to the second question, which is, I love hearing about your growing up, where you lived, the life with your actress mother, those sort of things. So, how long have you got? I'll make it short and snappy. So most of the time I lived with my mum, because she and my dad split up when I was nearly 9, which was very, very hard actually. And life with my mum wasn't the easiest. There were some quite difficult things that I had to deal with, and she had some difficult things to deal with too, which kind of impacted on me. But the wonderful things were being taken to film sets, for example. So one of my favourite trips, when I was 12, my mum made a film with John Hurt in Ireland. So we stayed in Dublin and we used to go out to the film set. It was somewhere in the countryside. I've forgotten the name of it now. There's a famous film studios there. And we were on location, and I met all these actors. I remember meeting Angelica Houston, actually. And this is where my name dropping comes in. And those of you who watched my channel before, very occasionally, maybe not as much as I do in real life, but I am a terrible name dropper. I've no reason to be, really. I've just met these people because my mum knew them. So, for example, I can say Kirk Douglas came to our flat and I met him. Or my granny took me to see a ballet with Rudolf Nureyev. Or who else we got? I met Charlton Heston and Rex Harrison when my mum made a film in Italy. That was another location at the Cinecittà, the film studios just outside Rome. So all those memories are very precious to me, and we had a fantastic time. I remember the trip to Rome was the first time that I'd flown first class. It was all paid for by the film company, and the film was called The Agony and the Ecstasy. And so we went first class, we stayed at the Hilton. Some guy that my mum knew came to pick us up in this huge Mercedes sports. Oh my gosh, I mean, I was only 11 or something, or 10, I can't remember exactly, but I just thought this is a bit like that song. What's that song by Marianne Faithfull where she talks about driving in a car with the wind blowing in her hair? Not that the song had come out at the time, but that's my memory of the experience. I just thought, oh, this is the life. I really like this. So in many ways, my life was very privileged. It was just not easy with my mum being on her own and my dad also having some low times. So those were quite difficult. But we lived in a nice area, although for a child growing up, it wasn't great because it was just off the Bayswater Road in a place called Lancaster Gate. And we lived in an apartment. It was huge, absolutely massive, but there was no garden. And in those days, you weren't even allowed to ride your bike after the age of 7 in Hyde Park. I only had one friend in our block who lived on the 3rd floor. So we did quite a lot of stuff together. But apart from her, I didn't really have any friends in the area. And the school I went to was in South Kensington, which, well, the crow flies, is really not very far from where I lived. But my friends were scattered all over London, so it was quite difficult to see them on a regular basis. So that was a bit of an issue. And also Lancaster Gate's a very transient place. It's full of hotels. In fact, what it had was at the end of the terrace where we lived, there was an American servicemen's club. So there were actually a lot of Americans in the area. But then just down the road in the other direction was Marble Arch. So I used to go on my own. Once I was allowed to go out on my own, I used to go to the cinema, I used to go shopping, so Selfridges and Marks and Spencer's were very nearby. And I could also walk over the park to get to High Street Ken. So it was incredibly well placed and very, very central, but it wasn't great for a community, let's put it that way. It was too transient and there wasn't much of a community to speak of. Now, just going back to the work question, I've just seen another question from Robert Neal, who says, I'd like to know if you still work and if it is in PR or marketing. Now that's really interesting. So I've answered the question. Yes, I still work. Although I'm not been in PR and marketing as such, my role as a charity fundraiser was very much marketing, I would say, with a bit of PR thrown in. So I suppose you could say that was my work. The next question is, what is my favourite all-time film, book, piece of music, holiday destination and happiest memory? Wow, those are some questions, Charlotte. That's from Charlotte Hodgson. So I'm just going to do this really quickly off the top of my head because no doubt I could spend hours thinking about this, as I'm sure we all could. So favourite film of all time, I think it has to be My Favourite Year. And I will link that down below for you if you don't know it. It's not a very well-known film, produced by Mel Brooks. One of the funniest films of all time. If I could choose that as my desert island film, I probably would, because it makes me laugh every time I watch it. My favourite book? That's a tricky one. It's often the last one I've read if I've really enjoyed it. I'm going to come back to that one in a minute while I think about the other, while I go on to the others. My favourite piece of music, oh my gosh, that's so difficult. It depends whether I want to be happy or sad. Holiday destination. Well, that's an interesting one. We've just talked about where I'd like to live in the world. Where would I like to go on holiday, or where's been one of my favourite places to go on holiday? Okay, I'm going to say, if I could choose and money was no object, I'd like to go. My favourite holiday destination is Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat in the south of France. And I'd like to stay at the Voile d'Or Hotel, which faces the east, so you can just about make out Monte Carlo in the distance. And that's probably my favourite holiday destination. My happiest memory, oh my gosh. Do you know what, Charlotte? These questions are really difficult, and they're quite sort of, and they bring to the surface some really heavy emotions. So I suppose my sort of primeval instinct is to say when my children were born. Right, going back to my favourite book and piece of music, honestly, the first thing that comes to mind isn't actually a novel. It's a book about the Nudestix. And can I think of the title now? No, oh yes, I can. The Hair with Amber Eyes. And I've reread it. That's why I'm mentioning that. It's actually not a novel, but it's beautifully written. It's about these tiny little pieces of amber called Nudestix. They're really tiny, and it's about their journey from the time they were bought by the writer's family, the Rothschild, and it's just the most beautiful book. Anyway, I'm going to link it down below for you if you haven't come across it. From understanding how pieces of art and end up in people's houses and how they look after them, or whether they look after them and what they do with them. It's just so interesting to me, because I'm not really that person. I don't have objects that I treasure. All that I treasure is in my heart. Oh, I'm going to get choked up again. So I don't have that attachment to objects, but it's just so beautifully described. Anyway, I'm going to leave the details down below for you, like I say. The piece of music, the first thing that springs to mind is the West Side Story album, and I'm just going to mention Somewhere, because it gets me every time. I think that's it for that question, Charlotte. Sorry if I got a bit emotional. Now, the next question is from Allegra, and she asks, she'd love to know how I stay so slim and what a typical day of eating is for you. Well, that's very interesting you should ask, Allegra, because I am planning to do a video on that, but I will answer the specific question. First of all, it's lovely of you to say that I'm slim. In my eyes, I'm not slim, but I'm not heavily overweight. I'm probably about 10 pounds overweight maximum, but I can live with that. Well, I am living with it. So what I do to keep my weight stable, I think that's really the answer, is what I do to keep my weight stable is I do tend to eat the same things every day. Not the same things every day, but I tend to have a routine. So I'll give you an example of what I eat in a day. When I'm at home, it's going to be a bit different here, but when I'm at home, I usually start the day with water because I have to take some pills. I'm supposed to wait 30 minutes after I've taken these 2 pills and my thyroxine before I have a coffee. Now, sometimes I don't do that. In fact, quite often I don't. But so I'll have some water with the pills and then I will have a coffee. Now, I make a really strong coffee with a French press, although I've been using the Nespresso machine here. I make a strong coffee with a little bit of full fat milk, not very much, but just a little bit. And I have the coffee, but I don't always drink it all. I might have a few sips. And then I wait until around about 9 or 10 o'clock before I have any breakfast. And then I have my homemade granola. So I make my own granola with nuts and seeds and porridge oats. And I use a small bowl. So I really try portion control. So that is one of the ways I manage to keep the weight relatively stable. I have a small bowl and I put some of my granola, and then on top of that I'll put some Greek full-fat yogurt, and then on top of that some berries. And I try to mix around the berries, so there might be blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, sometimes a bit of apple, sometimes a bit of apricot, whatever's in season, some plums. So a little bit of variety and not the same mix every day. So I try to mix it up from one day to the next. And then a tiny bit of maple syrup I drizzle on the top, or some honey. And that's usually my breakfast. Now in the winter I do have porridge sometimes as well, but again I'll add the berries and I'll add the maple syrup, or sometimes honey I prefer, and then a tiny little blob of yogurt as well. So that's my breakfast. No snacking until lunchtime. Lunchtime is usually very veg focused. So I might do some roasted veg. That's one of my favourite things to have, roasted veg with maybe a bit of carbs. So it might be a little bit of leftover pasta or leftover potatoes. I'm very much the leftover queen for lunch. And then what I'll also do is I call them my little jars of deliciousness. I buy them from a company called Bella Zoo, or I get them from the supermarket, but they're basically a delicious kind of pesto mix. So I'll put a tablespoon, maybe not a tablespoon, like a heaped teaspoon of this jar of deliciousness pesto thing. And I'll link it down below for you if you haven't come across Bella Zoo. It's a really lovely company. They do fantastic oils and vinegars and all of that kind of thing. And I'll put that on, mix it up, and then I'll grate some cheese over it. And that's my lunch. Then around about 4, I do get a bit kind of angsty and I want something. Now, historically, I was having hummus, which is quite filling, but then I would have some crackers with it or something, and then it would end up being very calorific. So I try not to have that at the moment. Or if I do have hummus, I won't have crackers, I'll have a bit of veg to dip into it, like some cucumber or something. But mostly I'm having a little bit of cheese with some grapes actually, and I freeze the grapes because I don't like a lot of the grapes that you can buy in the supermarket unless I can get my sable grapes, which I absolutely adore. I tend to freeze them, and then I'll have a few of those with some cheese, and that keeps me going till dinner time. Dinner time is usually about 7:30, 8 o'clock. And I'll have some pasta, which I've pre-cooked and then reheated because it's supposed to reduce the calorie. Or I might have a baked potato with some veg, maybe a bit of tuna. But those are my sort of midweek meals. But then for the weekend, we might have a steak, although my husband's gone off steak, but I love a steak. My favourite meal actually, which I don't think anyone's asked me in this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. My absolute favourite meal, and Tina, this is for you if you're watching, Tina's Beautiful Journey. I love probably a sirloin or a rump steak with some French fries, but not the thin kind that you actually get in France, the big thick cut chips as we call them in the UK. So a nice steak, French fries or chips, and a green salad, a beautiful French green salad. That is my ideal meal. I absolutely love that. So I sometimes have that at the weekend if we're not going out. Or I might do a spaghetti bolognese, or my husband cooks a lot, so I'll have him. He does really lovely fish dishes. So something of that kind. So the weekend is a bit more treaty, but during the week, I try to stick to a lot of vegetables and fruit and keep the refined carbs down. Oh, and I do have bread at the weekend, but not during the week. So I might have a sandwich. I might have a smoked salmon open sandwich, for example, on a Saturday or Sunday. Only sourdough bread, seeded sourdough, that's the only kind of bread I really like. I used to love rye bread, but I can't find light rye in London anymore. I can only find very dark rye, which I find too heavy. So seeded sourdough is my bread of choice with butter, unsalted. I mean, to be honest, I eat salted actually as well now, but unsalted butter, and I love cheese as well. I hope that's answered the question. It was probably a bit long-winded again. As you can tell, oh, I forgot to mention wine. I always have a small glass of wine every night, usually red, and usually a Rioja or a Côte de Rhône. Now, the next question's from Philippa Dodgson, and it's really timely, Philippa, this question actually. Makeup and clothing advice for a wedding ceremony when you're 65. That is so interesting because on New Year's Eve, we actually went to a wedding, a later life wedding, if you'd like to call it that, where the groom, I think, was 61, the bride was in her late 50s, but it was a tiny ceremony. It was literally just the four of us. So I got married at 56, and I did wear, and I'll try and insert a picture of you, a tiny little white dress. I mean, I thought, I'm going to wear white, why not? I had been married twice before, but hey-ho. And we did get married in this really fabulous place. It was at the National Theatre, but they rent out this space called The Deck, and we had it in July, and so the weather was actually kind to us, thank goodness. It hadn't been great that morning, but it was sunny all afternoon. And so we were outside on this deck. Now I'll tell you something, if you do get married on a deck, do not wear stilettos, because I wore stiletto heels and I kept getting them caught in the decking. But anyway, to go back to your point, what to wear. The one thing I would say is do not wear a pastel suit, because I think they look awful, but that's just my personal opinion. Do not wear a pastel suit. In fact, don't wear a suit. Well, you could wear a trouser suit. It depends on the weather, of course. You could wear a trouser suit. I mean, you can wear anything, but you could wear a trouser suit. You could wear a flowing dress. It depends on your body shape. I would say don't wear a hat, because I think those fascinators and hats look really aging. So I think if you want to keep it simple, depending on the time of year, I think a dress can look absolutely lovely. In fact, a long dress, why not? If you don't want to wear white, just get a pattern dress. I would just wear something that you might wear to a party rather than think about it as a wedding. I think that's probably the guiding principle, actually. If you're going to a party or a special occasion, just wear what you would wear for that, but make sure you feel comfortable, because you want to feel your best self. And I would do away with all the flim-flam, all the furbelows and the bows. No hat, no fascinator, pretty but comfortable shoes, and nothing fussy. That's what I would say, nothing fussy. Do your makeup and hair as you normally would. Don't necessarily put your hair up in something that you think might not work. Have a practice, of course, but just keep it very simple, elegant and beautiful. And I'm sure you'll look fabulous, Philippa, and it's never too late. Do it. I highly recommend it. I really do. Now, the next question is from Ruth, and she says, what do you love and maybe hate about living in London? And are you more a city or a country girl? And then finally, I love this one, which Winnie the Pooh character are you? Well, I'm going to answer that one first. Off the top of my head, I'm definitely Winnie the Pooh. I'm not Piglet, I'm certainly not Eeyore. I don't like to think of myself as Eeyore, although a lot of us probably have Eeyore tendencies as we get older. I absolutely adored Winnie the Pooh as a child. My mother used to read the books to me and I absolutely loved them. I really did. The Heffalump is probably my favourite story, and if you haven't read Winnie the Pooh, I'm going to link it down below for you, because honestly, if you don't read anything else, read the story about the Heffalump. It's the funniest thing, it really is. So, am I more a city or a country girl, and what do I hate and love about living in London? I've kind of touched on London a little bit. What I really love about it is the vibrancy and the choices of places to go and things to do. Even though I don't actually go to that many art galleries and exhibitions, I should do. And actually, one of my lovely friends, if you are interested in art, by the way, I'm going to recommend to you, one of my closest friends, Alex Abraham, has the most fantastic Instagram account. I will link it down below for you. She is an artist, and I have a lot of her art around my house. And I mention her specifically because she's so up to date on exhibitions that are going on in London and around the rest of the country as well. She's really worth following if you're an Instagram lover. Now, I've been to a few art exhibitions over the last, I've probably only been to a couple actually. The last one I went to with my husband and one of my closest friends, we went to the Van Gogh, which was amazing actually. It was at the Tate, where was it actually? Was it Tate Britain? Yes, no, Tate Modern. It was at Tate Modern, that's right. And it was beautiful, but really I want to go to some, no, it wasn't. It was at the National Gallery, that's right. It was at the National Gallery because I remember thinking I must go around the National Gallery again, not just for exhibitions, but actually just to see some art. So I'm very bad about doing that, but I love all the restaurants, I love the bars, I love the shops. I love going into the city and areas that I don't necessarily go to discover lots of little nooks and crannies and little places to visit. However, I am very keen to move out of London, and in an ideal world I'd have a pad in London and a pad in the country. I want to live by the sea. I want to live in Eyebrow, which is in Suffolk. It's about 2.5 hours drive from London. I would love to wake up in the morning, be able to walk to the sea. That's what I would like to experience on a daily basis actually. And I also want, because where I live in North London, I'm not close enough to Hampstead Heath to be able to benefit from it on a regular basis. Where I live, there's lots of woods. There's not a lot of open green space, and I miss that so much. Actually, where I'd love to spend more time as well is Cumbria, where I used to spend a lot of time with my ex-husband, my second ex-husband. No one's asked how many husbands I've had, but anyway, I have a second ex-husband, and he was from Cumbria. And Cumbria and the Lake District are one of the most beautiful areas in the UK. So I am a town mouse, but I'd also like to be a country mouse. I'd really like to have the best of both worlds. Now, here's an interesting question. What is my favourite thing to do when I get some time to myself? And this is from Fee. Well, I don't often get a lot of time to myself because at the moment I've got 2 jobs really. I've got my day job and I've got my side hustle of YouTube. But I suppose in the evening, if I can choose, I would like to watch a film or a series. So I really enjoy putting my feet up and watching something and being engrossed in something. I love doing that. If I'm not doing something very passive like that, just like lying down on the sofa, the things I like to do on my own are things like, if I have the time and I know there's nothing else I need to be doing that's kind of bugging me in the back of my mind, I do actually like making bread. Now, I've only probably made bread about 10 times in my life, but I really enjoy the kneading process, which was why I suggested to my friend and why my friend and I did the sourdough course I mentioned, I think, a while ago in one of my newsletters. Oh, and by the way, if you're not subscribed to my newsletter, the link is in the description box below. I bring that out every month, so I talk about my faves and fails, including my sourdough failure in those newsletters. So do subscribe if you'd like to hear more from me. We both really enjoyed the course, but I don't think either of us wanted to spend time, and it's not kneading, it's actually a lot of folding and fiddling and having to take it out of the fridge and do something to it and then put it back again. Whereas regular bread making with normal yeast, it's that kneading process. I find it quite relaxing, but I also do like following a recipe. And as long as I've got all the ingredients, it's fine. It's just when you look at the recipe, you know what it's like. You look at the recipe, you think you've ticked off everything, and you look at it just before you start making and go, oh, wait a minute, where's the self-raising flour or whatever it is? So I do quite like cooking, but I'm not dexterous. I think there is a question somewhere that asks me what my hobbies are, which we'll come to in a minute, but I'm really not dexterous, so I don't do a lot of things with my hands, so to speak. But kneading, you don't need to be very precise. It's much more about just getting in there and giving it a good go. So watching TV, I love going to the cinema, actually. I love going to the cinema. I would like to do more of that. And the theatre, actually. I love going to the theatre, and I sometimes go on my own because my husband's not that keen on it. But I love going to the theatre, even though I'm sometimes disappointed, but I don't mind that. And I particularly love going to see the big stars. So I loved seeing Sarah Jessica Parker and Matthew Broderick last year. I loved seeing Mark Strong and Leslie Manville recently. So I really enjoy the theatre, and I definitely need to go to some art galleries, and I would like to do that more as well. And I'm happy to do all of those on my own. I don't need company for those. Now, here's an interesting question from Trudy. Who inspires you, and what does your family think about your YouTube channel? Well, as far as my inspiration on YouTube, one of the main women whose channel I discovered during lockdown, which was when I really got into watching YouTube. I had watched it before a lot, but not really deep dived into it. I think I just stuck to the channels I knew. Whereas when lockdown happened, I started to spend a lot more time watching YouTube, and I discovered Tamara of Tamara's Timeless Beauty. Now, she's a little bit younger than me. She's 5 years younger, I think. She's just turned 65. But I thought, here is a woman I can relate to. She's a woman in her, I think she must have just turned 60 or 61. I think she'd been doing her YouTube channel for a year when I discovered her. And I just thought, gosh, this woman has mature skin like me. And I don't think I'd seen any YouTube channels with women with mature skin before. And I thought, this is really fantastic. This is exactly the sort of thing I've been looking for. So she was my first inspiration and someone who encouraged me to start the channel. And what does my family think about it? Well, that's funny because my grandson occasionally will turn on the YouTube because he watches Mr. Beast quite a lot, and he'll see me. And when he first saw me, he said, what's Granny doing on YouTube? They're absolutely fine with it. I think my husband finds the whole thing a complete mystery, but he's fine with it. And here's another related question, and this one is from Julie, and she says, how did I start my channel? What do you really want to do with it? And is it just a hobby, or do you want to get monetized if you're not already? So I started it a year after the pandemic started, so in 2021, after having gleaned a little bit of information, but even then I didn't really know what I was doing. And if you look back at my thumbnails, you'll see why I didn't really know what a thumbnail was. I had absolutely no idea what anything was, really. I was looking for British women of my age doing YouTube and doing beauty in particular and fashion, and I couldn't find any. So I thought, well, maybe there's a niche here for me. Maybe there's a place for me as a woman in her mid-60s, as I was then, doing fashion and beauty on YouTube. Now, since then, I think probably around the time I started, a few other women started as well, but I've only discovered them in the last year or so. So that's really good. I think what's happened is YouTube has clocked that mature women watch YouTube and also now have channels. And no, I don't want it to be a hobby. I would actually like it to be my business. Now, I became monetized, I think in mid-2023, but I didn't start to get any payments from YouTube because the money was so tiny, the amounts were so tiny, until about the middle of last year, 2024. And it wasn't until August that significant amounts of money were coming in. When I say significant, not a lot, not enough to live on, but certainly a decent amount of money. So, but it does fluctuate, because one month you might get, say, £1,000, another month you might only get £600. So it really does depend on the watch time. It's not about subscribers, it's about watch time. How many hours do your subscribers watch your channel? Which is why a lot of channels say, please watch my video till the end, because that way, that whole time that you've watched the video counts, and it counts in monetary terms. So that's why YouTube will pay you a certain amount. It will pay you for the watch time. Now, the next question is, do you have any creative hobbies like gardening, knitting, cooking, crocheting, or sewing? Well, no is the short answer. And you know, I've never had a hobby as such. I think partly because I'm not very dexterous and I lose patience with something after about half an hour or an hour. I can get stuck into something, whether it's gardening, and I do like gardening, but actually I don't do any more now because my husband's good at it and I don't really have a lot of time. But I used to do some gardening, and when I lived on my own for a brief period, I did do my own gardening. But I don't do gardening. I always kill houseplants. I'm hopeless with those. And I suppose the short answer is no. I've never really had hobbies of that kind. And at the moment, I don't have time for them. That's not to say that I wouldn't like to have one day, but at the moment, I don't know. Now, we've touched on this a bit about what kind of jobs have you had in the past. This is from Jessica. She also asked, does my husband still work and what does he do for a living? Well, just a quick run through of some of the jobs, and there have been lots of them. I started off as a legal secretary. I was then a professional singer for a few years. Then I had my kids, and I actually got my degree while my kids were very tiny. Then I went into the law and I trained as a lawyer. I became a barrister, but I never practiced. Then I went into the charity sector, and that was really where my career took off, and I stayed in the charity sector for a long time. Then I tried being self-employed as an event organiser, and that was an absolute disaster. So that's really the potted history of my career. Now, my husband doesn't work at his profession anymore, but he was a barrister and he specialised in employment law. And now he concentrates on other things that he likes to do, and he certainly earned it, because I can tell you, if any of you are lawyers out there, particularly if you're a barrister and you're self-employed, you have no spare time at all. He would work 5 days a week, and then at weekends he would work 2 half days. So he barely had any time off at all. He worked like an absolute dog, and he's really earned his rest. He really has. The next question from Helen is my hair coloured and highlighted? Yes, Helen, it is. I have been colouring my hair for years. In fact, I was colouring it long before it ever went grey. I used to buy crazy colour from Camden Market in the 80s and dye my hair puce or cyclamen. So yes, my hair is coloured. I've gone a lot lighter. I used to be probably the colour of my roots, or maybe even a bit darker. I'll see if I can insert a picture so you can see what colour my natural hair colour is. I still haven't quite got used to this colour, but I am quite grey, and I do go to the hairdressers to get the highlights put in, but I do my own roots, and I've been doing my own roots since lockdown, and I love it because it's so cheap and quick, and saves a huge amount of time of me schlepping to a hairdresser's and back again. Now there's only 2 more questions, you'll probably be relieved to know. And the penultimate question is best colours for one tone, hair colour and lips. For me, a red lip goes best with either very blonde or very dark hair. And I'll see if I can insert some pictures just to give you an idea, because I don't think you'd want to necessarily match your lipstick with your hair colour. So I think if you've got really blonde hair or really dark hair, a red lip can look beautiful. Whereas for me, I don't think I can really take a strong red lip, and also it's something to do with age up to a point, I think, although again it depends on colouring. So for example, I think Helen Mirren with that very white hair and that very pale skin looks fantastic with a red lip. But similarly, I would think someone like Paloma Picasso, I know I used to try and emulate her years ago. I don't know what she looks like now, I'll have to see if I can find a picture, but she used to look fantastic with a red lip. So I think maybe that's the answer. You need a contrast of the very dark hair and the strong lip. And the final question, and this is from Brenda, is there anything you would have done differently in your life? How long have you got, Brenda? I'm not going to get choked up, so I'm going to try not to be emotional about this and try and answer it practically. And yes, there are things I would have done differently in my life. And if we're talking about my career, I think I mentioned before, I would have become a specialist. I think I would recommend that for anyone, any young person starting out, even if your degree is a fairly general subject. If you can then go and specialise, do a master's or specialise in something and become an expert at it, that's what I would recommend. And that is what I regret not having done in my life. There are many more regrets, but we'll get too emotional if we get into those, and this is probably not a place for oversharing. So there we have it. We've got to the end of the questions. I dread to think how long this video is going to be. But honestly, I cannot thank you enough for asking those questions. I have the most wonderful subscribers and viewers. You are all so fantastic. And I know I always say, you mean the world to me, but I really do mean it. You can imagine, I'm a 70-year-old woman, and I never thought that I would get to the stage where I could have this dialogue with such wonderful, wonderful women. And I so appreciate you all. I really, really do. So thank you so much for watching. And although I'm in France, I am still going to be trying to do my 2 videos a week on Wednesdays and Sundays. And I hope you're all having a wonderful Sunday wherever you are in the world. And I'll very much look forward to seeing you on my next video. Bye.